ready to start working on my deck. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a fun place to hang out and drink a beer after work in the summer. So the plan is to plant hazelnuts in this whole field right here eventually, and my view will be blocked. So I think it'll be really nice to have a deck that's up high and you can look out over the field and enjoy the view we have here. First, let's jump on the computer and I'll show you my design, and then I just got to get to work. I have some concrete being delivered in a couple days, and I got to build some forms for the footings down there. So let's go. My barn has an overhang on the north side of it, and I'm building the deck over the top of it. I thought about tearing the overhang down in order to build the deck, but it's actually a pretty convenient place to park a pickup or other farm equipment where it's out of the rain and elements. It might look a little weird having a deck above it, but you have to leave a little bit of room for practicality here and there. Okay, so here's my rough game plan of how I'm going to build this deck. The first thing I need to do is to build a temporary wall to support the weight of the overhang, which will let me remove the wooden uprights supporting it. The 2x6s that are scabbed together across the underside of the overhang are rotten, and I really want to replace them with a bigger 6x6 pressure treated wooden beam. Next, I'll pour some concrete footings that'll support the 4x4 square metal tubing that'll support the weight of the overhang, deck, and the roof above it. Once I get those in place, I'm going to attach some 2x6 metal tubing. That will be the frame for the deck, and I'll weld hangers onto these, which will hold the 2x6 pressure treated floor joists. On top of that goes the 2x6 cedar decking, and then I'll fabricate some railings. I'm going to extend out these big wooden beams that run through the inside of the barn, and then somehow build some rafters on top of them. Haven't quite figured that part out yet. And cover it in roofing, which I also don't really know how I'm going to do. Lastly, I'll install a door to keep the owls out. That's the plan though. It's going to take a lot of problem solving along the way, but I think it's all pretty doable. It might need a little more bracing, some gussets on the corners, and maybe even some cross bracing across the front. But I'm gonna leave that for the end, after it's all built and I can see how it feels and determine if it needs more bracing at that point. Building a deck 20 feet in the air without a structural engineering degree and putting it out on the internet for everyone to see is a great way to create an unstoppable wave of scrutiny with regards to the deck's safety. With that being acknowledged, here we go. The first thing I needed to do was to clean up the area underneath the overhang. I found out this area was my cat's litter box. It was a little gross. These are the 2x6s that I'm planning on replacing that support the weight of the overhang. I got to work building the temporary wall that'll support the overhang in the meantime. After I got all the uprights in place, I attached some metal strapping diagonally to give it some shear strength. There's now sadly time for the deer antlers to come down. Who knows how long they've been up there for. Drake definitely had some curiosity about them. Now that I was pretty sure the overhang was supported well, I could cut out the upright beams that used to hold it. I carried them to a scrap pile in the front of the barn, actually the back of the barn. I needed to find the approximate area the footings are going to go, and I used my laser level for this. It didn't need to be too exact for this part. I just needed to know roughly where the hole for the footing is going to go. After lining up on the two beams coming out the top of the barn, and also underneath the beam supporting the overhang, I was ready to start digging. I had a ton of energy, and I was really excited to jump in and work my butt off digging these big holes by hand. Some hard manual labor is always good for the spirit and soul. Okay, I might have grabbed the backhoe, but I definitely got most of the hole dug first by hand. Just thought I'd finish it off with the backhoe. I think Drake was really hoping we'd unearth a big dinosaur bone. He watched me dig intently the whole time. I wanted to put 2 feet of packed gravel at the bottom of the hole for the footing to sit on, which is why I was digging the hole so deep.
Drake.
And Drake's habit that I've grown to love of dropping the ball in the hole that I'm digging was a common occurrence here, of course, too. Once I had the holes dug out, I took some scoops off the gravel pile and dumped it in. Using my laser level set at any arbitrary height, I could measure down to the level of the gravel, filling the holes to the same height. And then my American-made Model 4000 gravel compactor reared its ugly head again. This thing's still not quite running right. Just can't seem to get that sorted out. I had some nice blisters after using that thing that I had to put up with for the next couple of weeks. Now that the holes were dug and my hands were jacked, I got to work building the concrete forms. I've made concrete forms a couple times now, and I've learned it's just about the worst feeling in the world when you start filling them up with concrete and they start bulging at their seams and deforming and leaking concrete everywhere. So I'd be sure to spend the time now building some forms that are good and strong. I originally made these bottom boxes 3 feet in all directions, but they looked ridiculously huge. So I cut off the bottom foot. So now they're only 2 feet deep. Still huge, but looked reasonable to me. I thought it would be good to have the metal deck supports welded to the footings and not just set on them. So I picked up a couple pieces of square tubing from the scrapyard that I planned to set in the concrete when it's poured. I wanted to cut some holes in it that I could stick rebar through, which will really give the concrete something to bite on. At least that's how I'm picturing it in my mind. It kind of started to look like the world's gnarliest coat hanger. Hey, feel free to hang your coat here. Just be sure you've had a tetanus shot recently. I welded some smaller rebar on around the outside of the frame. Lastly, I wanted to make a cup for the upright deck post to sit into. I thought water could possibly get on the inside of the post, even though it's going to be welded shut, just from condensation, even possibly. And so I drilled a hole in the bottom of the cup so the water could just drain through into the ground. Once I got the cup welded on, I gave it a little spray paint. This is the only part that'll be exposed out of the concrete, so I didn't worry about the rest of it. I hauled my new coat hangers down to my barn, along with my welder and the rest of the tools I needed. It was time for the laser level again, but this time I needed to be as exact as possible. I need to find the center of the beam up top, so the metal support post will be centered on it. And then I need to find the edge of the beam underneath the overhang, which is where the front side of the metal post will go. And then at this intersection, I move 2 inches away from the barn to mark the point that the posts and the footings will be centered on. I waited till the sun had gone down, which helped a lot with seeing the laser line. It took a lot of adjustment, but I finally got the laser to run parallel to the beam underneath the overhang and to match up with the mark on the barn. So I drove in a little spike to mark that point. I got the bottom form centered and level, and then held it in place with some gravel around the outside. I dropped in the coat hanger and then put the top form on over the top of it and screwed it down to the bottom form. The next morning I got up early to finish these up. The concrete truck was supposed to show up at 9 a.m. and I had a couple things to wrap up on them still. Bolted in a little more support, making sure they were centered, and then I was ready for the concrete. These mobile mixing concrete trucks are so cool to me. You can drive the whole truck and move it around from the hydraulic controls in the back. He positioned the truck and the chute right over the form and started filling it in. My dad was nice enough to come give me a hand. It's kind of stressful when you have someone there waiting on you, and it's always nice having someone else to help settle the concrete and get the form filled in. So I should have rented a concrete vibrator. It would have really helped to fill in all the little pockets in the forms. Some of the rebar was a little too close to the wooden form, I think, and the aggregate would get hot. When I took the forms off later, I was pretty disappointed to see there were a couple cavities in the bottom of the top form. We started working on troweling the surface of the concrete. The bottom wider section will be buried in the gravel and it won't be visible, but we still worked it just for the heck of it. My dad used an edging tool to round over the corners, which helps keep them from breaking off and makes them look a lot nicer. And my grandpa even stopped by to see how the concrete pouring went.
Hey, too late? Yeah. Figured I was.
Dad thinks it should have made him bigger.
I was wondering that too, Jeff.
I got a little bit of teasing for how big I made the footings, but I guess better too big than too small.
I guess I'll go. Good. Thanks for the help.
And since I'm a human being just like everybody else, I couldn't resist the urge to write something in the wet concrete. Got pretty original with it too.